nation's troops conduct an orderly withdrawal down the Korean peninsula. Fighting every step of the way, they retain landing fields and facilities until the very last minute. With airlifts operating full blast, transports sustain inevitable casualties. But the job of supplying the GI, fighting heroic rearguard actions, goes on. UN forces are fending off an attempted encircling move by 3 armies of Chinese Reds, and field officers in command are deploying their troops in a thin line across to prevent the frantic flanking attacks of the Reds. 5 minutes before this GI was hit during a counterattack against an enemy that outnumbers the Allies 4 to 1. Previously demolished bridges are repaired by engineers to permit the evacuation of military vehicles. It is the grimmest kind of warfare, with the enemy lurking on every side. Here are some of the casualties, which among Americans alone have passed the 40,000 mark, with 6,700 dead and 27,000 wounded. Another 6,100 are missing in action. Wounded often have been evacuated in temperatures of 30 below zero. A bright spot in the campaign are the Sabre jets, which rule the skies. As they cruise over Allied forces on the hunt for enemy formations to strafe, they suddenly get a Russian-built MiG fighter in their sights. And fast as the Red plane is, it can't escape a burst which has deadly effect. Fatally hit, the Red plane starts to smoke and goes into its final dive. Once again, the Sabres have proven more than a match for the Red jets. Chalk up another for the Sabres, with no losses of their own. Enemy equipment goes up in smoke as the relentless UN Air Force blasts supply lines with firebombs, rockets, and machine guns. They have knocked out thousands of Red vehicles and tanks. Countless enemy troop concentrations have been broken up, and thousands have been mowed down in air attacks. We are in Korea to stay, and UN flyers are there to prove it.
As Chinese and North Korean ground forces occupy the ruined land for which they are paying so dear a price, fighter bombers of the UN Air Force fly constant sorties to harass and impede their movements and to destroy their supplies. The merciless blasting is in line with our determined efforts to prevent the enemy from marshaling sufficient troops for a major push before the UN forces have time to consolidate their strength in their new positions. Was to have been pitted against the outnumbered UN troops disappears in flashes of flame and puffs of smoke. After identifying their targets, our planes swoop down like avenging shadows of death and destruction. North Korean prisoners indicate that the incessant air attacks are wreaking havoc with troop morale. The enemy is kept off balance and prevented from holding the tactical initiative.
During the week of the 22nd to the 29th of January, the UN moves northward as strong task forces recapture key cities and probe for the enemy's main line of defense. Here, a 25th Division combat team strikes north from positions below Osan to test communist strength and to occupy the many towns reported held by only token enemy units. Troops of the 35th Regimental Combat Team enter battered Osan without opposition. After defense posts are established, they push on toward the first day's objective, a village north of Ulsan. Here a soldier cleans and checks his machine gun to avoid the danger of stoppages in the wintry weather. Across a frozen stream, the men continue their advance along the road to Suwon. Other UN units to the east move 12 miles above Wonju, while Kumyangjiang falls to Allied forces in an attack highlighted by a bayonet charge of the Turkish brigade. Naval units bombard Incheon in a diversionary raid. UN planes fly 700 sorties on this day, inflicting high losses against the enemy. Though tanks have not recently been encountered in any large numbers, the troops are well prepared for them. As the task force nears its day's objective, civilians coming from the village are methodically searched for weapons. The refugee problem has eased considerably in comparison with the mass flight of hundreds of thousands from Seoul and other endangered cities in the past month, but there are still those who remain in the combat zones between the two armies, keeping UN soldiers constantly on guard against the danger of communist infiltrators. Task force troops move carefully into the war-scarred town, where they will spend the night on the alert for red snipers and suicide groups. A South Korean interpreter questions two refugees. As the limited offensive goes into its second day, the 25th Division spearhead sweeps across the low hills toward Suwon. The 8th Army, finding little red pressure to contend with, regains hundreds of square miles in the western sector of the front. An enemy strong point is encountered, and artillery is called for. The 155 howitzer is zeroed in. To avoid bypassing red pockets in the hills, the troops leave the roads, searching the countryside and villages. Prisoners are taken, some of the few found in the nearly deserted towns. On the second day of their thrust up the main coastal road to Seoul, the task force enters the outskirts of Suwon, carefully searching every building for concealed Reds. Scattered enemy resistance is quickly cleaned out. Meanwhile, sizable gains are recorded north of Incheon and Kumyangjiang, while the naval shelling of Incheon moves into its second day. The day after Suwon's capture, an armored spearhead leaves the north gate, pushing on towards the Han River. Soon it meets the first strong red defensive lines, halting 12 miles from Seoul. General Joseph S. Bradley, Assistant Commander of the 25th Division, inspects his advancing troops. The customary inspection and interrogation of civilians begins at Suwon. 25th Division rests, as reports come in that firm contact has finally been re-established with major units of the enemy. UN troops, in the second week of their limited offensive, battle northward toward Seoul, continuing to forge ahead over the bitterly contested ground north of Suwon. In the new system of United Nations offense, forced by communist hold or die tactics, Allied forces leave the road and dig the Reds from their caves and foxholes. Enemy dead litter the ridge. Chinese prisoners, routed out of the hills, are thoroughly searched and administered first aid by soldiers of the 25th Division. The face of an American GI expresses the bitter sadness that comes with war. The captives are then escorted to the rear for further interrogation. Very few Chinese surrender to UN forces, as they are taught to expect swift execution upon capture. When convinced that they will not be killed, they are often eager to give information. A United Nations task force moves up for an assault on an enemy-held ridge north of Suwon, as the offensive pushes steadily ahead. Realizing the dangers of over-fatigue, these hardened soldiers have learned to take advantage of every opportunity to rest. Now, well accustomed to the strenuous conditions of battle, the men group together in a well-earned sleep